Once upon a time in the heart of Lagos, a city pulsating with life, ambition, and dreams, lived a man whose name was whispered in awe and admiration, Shaw Williams. He was the enigmatic CEO of Williams Tech Solutions, a leading technological company that had revolutionized the digital landscape of Nigeria. Shaw was not just wealthy, he was a visionary, a man whose brilliance and charisma were matched only by his reclusive nature. Unlike other wealthy men who flaunted their riches, Shaw preferred to remain in the shadows, allowing his wealth and influence to speak for him. This air of mystery only added to his allure, making him the subject of countless fantasies and speculations. Shaw's assistant, Jay, was the only person who had direct access to him. Jay was Shaw's mouth and ears in the public sphere, handling all his communications and public appearances. Because of this, Jay became a target for many women who hoped to get closer to the elusive Shaw Williams. Among these women was Tenny, a socialite known for her extravagant lifestyle and insatiable appetite for luxury. Tenny had dated several wealthy men in the past, but none of them had the mystique and power of Shaw Williams. He was the ultimate prize, the man who seemed untouchable, and Tenny was determined to make him hers. Tenny's plan was simple yet cunning. She would charm Jay, make him fall in love with her, and use him as a stepping stone to get closer to Shaw. Jay, unaware of her true intentions, fell for her completely. He was captivated by her beauty, her wit, and the attention she lavished on him. One evening, over a romantic dinner, Tenny finally asked the question she had been waiting to ask. "Tell me, Jay," she said sweetly, pouring him another glass of wine. "What kind of woman does Shaw like?" Jay laughed as he sipped his drink. Tenny, even I don't know that. My boss is very private. But one thing I do know is that he doesn't like flashy women." Tenny's mind raced. If Shaw liked simple women, then she would become the simplest woman he had ever seen. The next day, Tenny transformed her entire image. Gone were the designer dresses, the flashy jewelry, and the expensive wigs. She replaced them with simple outfits and braided her hair, adopting a more modest and unassuming appearance. She manipulated Jay into introducing her to Shaw, not caring that Jay was deeply in love with her. When Jay finally realized what Tenny had done, the pain was unbearable. One evening, after Tenny had successfully weaseled her way into Shaw's life, Jay confronted her. "Tenny, I need to ask you something," Jay said, his voice quiet but heavy. Tenny barely looked up from her phone. "What is it?" Jay hesitated before speaking. "Did you ever care for me at all?" His voice wavered, his hands clenched into fists to stop them from shaking. "Or was I just a stepping stone for you to get to Shaw?" Tenny finally looked at him, her expression indifferent. "Jay, don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" "Tenny, I loved you. I believed in you." Tenny sighed, rolling her eyes. "Did you really think I would end up with a man like you? You're just an assistant, Jay. You were useful, but that's it." Jay felt like the air had been knocked out of him. He stared at her, unable to believe what he had just heard. "You used me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And you never cared." Kenny shrugged. "It's nothing personal. You should have known your place." Jay felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. He had given her his love, his trust, and in return, she had trampled on it. As he walked away from her that night, something inside him changed. The love he had felt for Tenny was gone, replaced by an intense anger. Meanwhile, Tenny's twin sister, Pidu, was deeply disappointed by her sister's actions. Pidu was nothing like Tenny. She valued honesty, kindness, and hard work, things that Tenny had never cared about. Growing up, Pidu had always tried to guide her sister towards the right path, but Tenny had been too blinded by greed and ambition to listen. Now, watching the way Tenny heartlessly discarded Jay, Pidu could not help but side with him. I'm taking his side because Jay is a good man, Pedu said to Tenny. And you, Tenny, you're a liar and a deceiver. You've deceived everyone, including yourself. Tenny rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Pedu. You're just jealous because I'm about to secure the life of a billionaire's wife while you're stuck in your boring life. Is that what you think, Tenny? Pedu asked, her voice filled with sadness. Yes, Pedu. That's exactly what I think. You've always been the good twin, playing the saint while I go after what I want. But let me tell you something. Life isn't fair to good girls. It favors those who know how to play the game. Pedu sighed deeply. Do you truly love Shaw? Tenny paused for a moment and then laughed. Love? Who needs love when you have money? Pedu shook her head in disappointment. Days passed, and Pedu found Jay sitting alone in a bar, his drink untouched. Jay, she said gently as she sat beside him. Jay didn't look up. I was a fool, he said, his voice filled with sorrow. I gave her my heart, and she threw it away like it was worthless. Pedu placed a comforting hand on his. That doesn't mean your heart is worthless, Jay. It just means she never deserved it. Jay sighed, his eyes dark with pain. How did I not see it? How did I not realize who she truly was? Pedu could feel the pain in his voice. Because you are a good man, Jay, and good men believe in love. But don't let her change you. Don't let her turn you into a man that you aren't. Jay finally looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something shift inside of him. Meanwhile, Tenny had succeeded in making Shaw fall deeply in love with her. She was the center of his world, and she ensured that everything revolved around her. She played the perfect role, humble, loving, and supportive. She went to charity events with him, pretended to love reading, and even spoke about wanting a quiet life away from wealth and luxury. Shaw was completely smitten by her. Jay and Pedu, however, watched in silence, waiting for the truth to be unveiled. They knew the truth and believed that Tenny would be unable to keep up the act for much longer. One evening, Tenny returned home to an empty house. Her housekeeper had packed up and left, leaving a short note that read, Madame, I have to return to my village due to a family emergency. I apologize for the short notice. A replacement has been arranged for you. She will start tomorrow morning. Tenny scoffed as she tossed the note aside. Useless woman. Couldn't even last long in this house. The next morning, the doorbell rang, and standing outside was a frail-looking elderly woman dressed in a faded outfit. Good morning, Ma, the woman said humbly, bowing her head. My name is Mama Ron, and I was sent to work as your new maid. Tenny barely gave her a second glance. Whatever. Just make sure you do your job right, and don't get in my way. The woman nodded silently as she stepped inside. But what Tenny did not know was that this wasn't just an ordinary maid. This was Madame Ron Williams, Shaw's mother. Madame Ron had long been suspicious of Tenny. She had seen women like Tenny before, gold diggers who only loved the man for what he could give them. But she didn't want to rely on rumors. She wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. So, using her wealth and connections, she arranged for Tenny's housekeeper to leave and took her place in disguise. Now, she was inside the lion's den. For the first few days, Madame Ron walked quietly, observing everything. She saw how Tenny barely acknowledged her presence, treating her like she was invisible. She noticed how Tenny would smile sweetly at charity events, only to return home and curse at the poor on TV, calling them lazy. She watched as Tenny pretended to be simple, only to secretly order designer bags and shoes online, rushing to hide them before Shaw could see them. But the moment that sealed Tenny's fate was one fateful afternoon. Madame Ron had just finished mopping the floors when Tenny, in a rush to leave for an appointment, slipped and fell on the wet floor. Tenny screamed in rage, glaring at the elderly maid. You stupid old woman! Are you blind? Do you even have a brain? She shrieked. Madame Ron bowed her head. I'm very sorry, Ma. Filled with so much rage, Tenny began to scream angrily at Madame Ron. Are you stupid? She asked, struggling to get up from the floor. Do you know how expensive my time is? Do you even have a brain? She spat, her voice dripping with venom. Madame Ron bowed her head in shame as she apologized once more. But Tenny, filled with rage, gave her a hot slap across the face and pushed her to the ground. Grabbing the back of her head, Tenny shoved her face right into the bucket of dirty mop water. You should be grateful I don't fire you, you useless cleaner. She spat as she walked away, not caring that the elderly woman she had just humiliated was gasping for breath. Madame Ron sat there for a moment, trying to regain her composure. Inside, she was furious, not because she had been treated like a common maid, but because this was the woman who wanted to marry her son. She wiped her face with a cloth, determined never to allow her son to end up with a woman like Tenny. The next evening, Shaw invited Tenny to a private dinner at his family's estate. Tenny, filled with excitement, believed that Shaw was going to make their relationship official. She walked into the luxurious house, beaming with anticipation. But then her blood ran cold. Standing beside Shaw in the luxurious living room was Mama Ron, her maid. She was no longer in her maid uniform, and Tenny could feel her heart stop. Shaw, what is my maid doing here? She stammered, her voice trembling. Shaw's face remained calm. Maid? He repeated, tilting his head as he looked at her, shocked. Tenny, meet my mother. Tenny felt the room spin. Her hands shook as she turned to Madame Ron, who was now gazing at her with a piercing look. No, no, this can't be possible, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Madame Ron stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. No, Tenny, I was never your maid, but you showed me exactly how you treat people beneath you. Tenny's breath hitched. I lived in your house, Madame Ron continued. I saw everything, the fake humility, the cruelty, the lies. Tenny felt her world collapse. She turned to Shaw, tears forming in her eyes. Shaw, please, you have to believe me. Shaw raised his hand, silencing her. I trusted you, he said, his voice filled with disappointment. I thought I had finally found a woman who loved me for me. Tenny stood there, shaking, as she watched her whole world crumble before her eyes. She tried to defend herself, but suddenly, Jay and Shaw's sister walked in, clapping and applauding her for her terrific performance. Tenny could not understand what was happening. She stood there frozen, her heart racing. Why was Jay clapping? Why did he look so confident? She turned to Shaw, expecting him to scold his assistant, but Shaw sat there, smiling a slow, knowing smile that made her blood run cold. Then Jay took a step forward and spoke. Tenny, you truly are something else, he said, shaking his head. You thought you were playing us. How smart of you, he said as he laughed at her mockingly. Tenny's throat went dry. What are you talking about? She stammered. Jay let out a deep laughter. Tenny, I'm not just Jay, he said, his eyes flashing with something she had never seen before, authority. I am Shaw J. Williams, the real CEO of Williams Tech Solutions. Tenny's legs buckled as sweat poured down her face. Jay smiled at her and continued to speak. The man you've been scheming to marry, the one you thought was the CEO, is actually my cousin, Shahad Williams. We share the same first name, and I let people believe that he was the real boss while I stayed in the shadows as his assistant. Tenny felt like she could not breathe. She had ignored Jay, insulted him, broken his heart, even when she knew how much he loved her. She had thrown away the real billionaire while running after the wrong man. Tenny's hands shook as she turned to her sister, Pedu, desperate for support. But Pedu only stared at her with disappointment. Pedu, please, help me talk to Jay. I'm so sorry for what I did. I was wrong for not accepting his love. But Pedu only shook her head. Tenny, she said, her voice firm but calm, you are never sorry. You were only sorry because you got caught. Tenny's heart pounded in her chest as she turned back to Jay, desperation filling her voice. Jay, please, give me a second chance. I was blind before, but now I see. You're the only man I want. I swear, I love you. Jay gave her a long, hard look. Love? He scoffed. You don't love me. You love the idea of wealth. You love power. You love what you thought you were securing. If you had truly loved me, you would have chosen me when you thought I was just an assistant. Tenny dropped to her knees, her designer dress pooling around her as she grabbed onto his hand. Please, she sobbed, don't do this to me. Jay calmly pulled his hand away. I'm not doing anything to you, he said. You did this to yourself. He raised his hand, and two security guards stepped forward. Escort her out, he said coldly. And I don't want to ever see her in this house again. Tenny began to plead for mercy. Jay, please, I'll change. I'll be better. She wailed as the guards grabbed her by the arms and pulled her towards the door. Jay watched silently as she was dragged out of his estate. The last thing he heard was her scream of regret. The next morning, Tenny's name was all over the news. Socialite Tenny I humiliated and disowned by billionaire family after playing the wrong game. Tenny's reputation was shattered. Her socialite friends abandoned her, and no one wanted to associate with a woman who had schemed and failed so publicly. She had lost everything she had worked so hard to get. Meanwhile, at the Williams estate, a new beginning was unfolding. Edu and Jay sat together as they discussed the past. The last month had been a game changer for them, as they had grown closer than ever. Jay turned to Pedu, his gaze softer than she had ever seen. You were right about everything, he admitted. I should have seen through Tenny sooner. Pedu smiled gently. Sometimes we have to experience the storm before we appreciate the calm. Jay sighed. I wasted so much time chasing after someone who never cared, while the one person who saw me for who I truly was right here in front of me. Petta's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. What are you saying, Jay? She asked hesitantly. Jay took a deep breath. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, my heart was always meant for you. Petta's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Jay reached for her hand, his touch warm and firm. I don't want to make the same mistake twice, he said. Would you give me a chance? Petta's lips parted in surprise, but deep down, she had always known Jay was different. He was kind, he was loyal, and most of all, he was real. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. I'd love to, she whispered. Finally, the right woman had found her way to Jay's life, and as Pedu and Jay sat together, talking and laughing under the soft evening light, a new chapter began, one built on honesty, respect, and true love. The lesson to be learned from this story is that love is not about wealth, status, or material gain. It is about sincerity, kindness, and true connection. Tenny's downfall teaches us that deception and greed can never build a lasting foundation for love. She lost everything because she prioritized money over genuine affection. Meanwhile, Pedu and Jay's story highlights the importance of integrity, patience, and recognizing true love when it is in front of us. In the end, honesty and a pure heart will always triumph over manipulation and greed. I hope you enjoyed the story.